Welcome to the First Time Facilitator podcast. Whether you're a first-time facilitator or a seasoned pro, listen in for tips and tricks to make a bigger impact at the next workshop you deliver. And now, your host, Leanne Hughes.
Hello everyone and welcome to the show. I'm your host Leanne Hughes and I'm here to help you create unpredictable workshop experiences that predictably work. We're closing in to the end of not only a year but a decade as well. So I wanted to take some time out on today's episode to reflect on the year and ask some questions to help you also reflect, as well as focus on creating a very delightful 2020. Now, because this is a podcast about facilitation, I'd like to break this reflection piece into a few main areas. So reflecting on lessons I learned from facilitating workshops this year, a few career and business lessons, and then everything else is in category 3, basic life lessons, things about energy, mental health, finance, that sort of stuff. Before I launch into this episode, remember, if you'd like to join the conversation when the podcast is over, you can join over 420 facilitators from all over the world. Very helpful facilitators, I might say, sharing all their cool activities. People are asking questions, uploading photos. It's a really unreal community, very, very helpful. That group is called the Flip Chart, and there's a link to that in the show notes for this one. And anything else I mentioned as a resource on this show can be found over at firsttimefacilitator.com/98. Okay, now onto the show. I've titled this episode, "That Which You Can Plan Is Too Small for You to Live," which is a quote by David White. And the reason I've called it that is because it's really great to do all this planning, but you've also got to remember that life just happens as well. And sometimes things may not work to plan in the way that you wanted it to go, in not the best way, but sometimes life can surprise you and exceed everything that you wrote down at the beginning of the year. That's what I certainly discovered this year. I'd planned certain things. I made a spreadsheet of ideal projects and clients I thought I'd work with. But what actually happened were things were completely unanticipated and thankfully so much bigger and better than what I'd been dreaming of or even had the imagination to think would happen. So I think in my 2018 planning process, I probably dreamt a little too small, which isn't a bad thing. And I think that's possibly a human thing. We tend to plan things that we can predict may possibly happen. And I love the book Rework. It talks about strategic plans and how we should just rename them strategic guesses, because how do we have any idea of the things that are possible? But the weird thing about my 2018 planning was I thought I was dreaming big. And if you're a regular listener to the show, you would have heard me say things like, the biggest fear that I had leaving my corporate job in February this year was that, well, A, I wouldn't get any gigs or clients, but B, I wouldn't get the chance to travel internationally, which was a big perk of my previous role. But what has happened what has happened this year has been a complete opposite. Most of my big gigs have been international ones. My theme for 2019 was the year of maintenance, where I had these amazing plans to create beautiful workflows, automations, create systems for newsletters, batching all my podcast episodes, creating routines. But I didn't get there. I've been too busy with working in the business, with delivering, with showing up at the best way that I can, to be honest. There were so many external changes with leaving my job. I underestimated that and I actually underestimated what my week would look like. I thought I would work the same hours, but I didn't. I actually work less hours now, and it's really hard to describe the differences between being in a corporate job where you've got this task and things to do and all these meetings to attend. And when you free up your time working for yourself, everyone says, it's going to be hard work and busy. Yes, to a certain degree, but I've discovered ways of working more efficiently. And really the best hours for me are the ones before lunch. And so if I can smash out some work before lunch, I feel like I can do, 1 or 2 days worth of work in concentrated effort of about 4 hours in the morning. So I'm not scared to admit that. That's why we start our own business, right? To free up our own time. At the same time, then when I have time in the afternoon, I start just scrolling on social media and doing things writing emails that may not be so productive. But look, constantly learning, it's part of the journey, right? So I really wanted maintenance in my life, but a few things have slipped. I still run, but not to the level that I was last year. That has slipped. Being consistent with sending out newsletters. I kind of joke about it on the show, how my newsletters are sent out, fortnightly-ish, monthly-ish. I've skipped a few months this year. So I didn't deliver in that way, but maintenance has shown up in other ways. So the way that I've delivered consistent content to this podcast, how I've been consistently showing up on LinkedIn. And what I discovered with my consistency is it's much easier to maintain it across the things which give me joy. And I guess you, as podcast listeners, you're listening to other podcasts which all talk about setting your 2020 intentions and thinking of a word to theme your year, which is great. That's been an activity that I've undertaken the last few years. But I was sitting on a call with Jenny Blake last week. I'm part of her private momentum community. She runs fortnightly webinars. And she asked the question, instead of thinking of a word to describe the theme for your year, is there a metaphor, a quote, or a symbol which you could use to set your year's intentions? So when I reflect on 2019, I think a phrase which wraps it up is that Nike slogan, just do it. Since leaving corporate this year, I have been all about getting stuck in, showing up, delivering, getting things done, putting the perfection monster aside and just doing it. Just do it. When I think of 2020, I don't want it to be another just do it year. And instead I've decided to use an object to theme my year. And this may sound pretty random, but my object for 2020 is the alternator. The alternator is something that's in your car. And the alternator is a generator of electric power in a car, and it's a major component of the vehicle's charging systems. Like I said, it sounds random, but please stick with me. So an alternator is a maintenance-free unit. In some cars, it can last up to 10 to 15 years without any repairs. And the alternator is useful because it charges the car battery, but only charges the battery when the car is on. So the alternator is a really important part of your vehicle, because it helps power up your vehicle when you travel. It takes the mechanical energy, generates electricity, sends it to the motor that is recharging the battery. So that's the physics behind the alternator. The reason why I've chosen the alternator and why it resonates with me for 2020 is that when I reflect on this year, I realize that I get charged up. I charge up when I actually take the action and do the thing, when I'm on the road. I get restless, I feel disengaged, I feel disempowered when I sit around idle, waiting or thinking or overthinking. So when I get that idea to recharge, I need to be driving, traveling, moving forward, taking action. And I also like the idea that the alternator is maintenance free, how it works best when it's doing the thing. So I want to apply this theory of being an alternator to aspects of my life, including my relationships, my business, my life and health. It's just when you do things, you build momentum and you get feedback. So most recently, I posted about my 100th episode celebrations in Brisbane. I put it on the Flipchart community without having a venue locked in. I just thought, look, this is stuck in my head. The 7th of January is just around the corner. I need to get this out so people can start planning around it. I didn't have a venue though. The magic of that was I put it up on Facebook. And Dr. Catherine Lloyd, who has been a previous guest on 2 episodes of this podcast, reached out, gave me a call and said, Leanne, I found a great venue. It's my co-working space. There's a beautiful balcony. We can, you can bring in food and drink, and just offered me a venue. So there is actually real value in putting things out to the world when they aren't perfect. And I do have a philosophy of doing that already, but I feel like I need to step it up. There's a lot of ideas I have in my head that you don't even know about because I was just too scared to put them out when they're not fully formed. So I'm going to try and get more into agile mentality and just put things out and iterate on the go. So that's what I want to do for 2020 is like channel the alternator. And I actually just like the word. It just kind of reminds me of the Terminator. So that's it. And I know it's very random, but I thought I'd share that with you. So that's my question for you then. If you had to sum up your 2019 using a metaphor, a quote, an object, a symbol, or an animal, how would you describe that? I suggest when I ask these questions through the show that you might want to pause and have a think. So 2019, what would you use to describe the year that you've just had? Even a song title or a book title, what would it be? And the follow-on question to that is, if you could choose and dictate what 2020 is for you, what metaphor, quote, object, symbol, animal, song title, song lyric, book title, could you use to describe what that looks like for you? And yes, it could be another part of the car. Okay, so that's starting really general. Now let's look at 3 different elements: facilitation, business, careers, and life. We'll start with facilitation. Now, if you sign up to my monthly newsletter, the Flip Chart, or monthly-ish, you would have seen me mention a few key reflection questions that I've been considering when I reflect on this year. And in that newsletter, I also asked you to park that rational side of your brain while you work through your reflection and planning process. Especially when you start thinking about 2020, try to go broad, try to go big, try to really imagine. Don't get stuck in how will this ever happen. So like I said, after each of these questions, you may want to hit the pause button to think about how this has played out for you. So a few questions are: what was the best workshop that you delivered this year? Why was it the best workshop? What is the topic you're most drawn to when it comes to facilitating? What was the best activity or conversation that you facilitated? Who was the ultimate client or group that you facilitated work with this year? What type of experiences are you drawn to? Think about the ultimate workshop experience for you and describe it in detail. What will that look like? Sometimes when you reflect on these questions, it can be easier to think about what you didn't like. So what topics did you hate running workshops on? What clients do you think just drained your energy? And then think about what would the opposite of that look like. That can sometimes help inform your planning. And when you think about your ultimate workshop, try to think of all the details, start getting some imagery around it. Like here's a sample one of mine. So my ultimate workshop experience would have about 16 people involved who are really passionate about turning good things into great things. They're not dysfunctional, they're really high performing, but they want to make it even better. The workshop is set at an amazing venue with high ceilings and natural light flooding in, overlooking the ocean. The topic we're talking about and exploring is all about ideation and creating new ideas, and everyone is psyched to attend. I'm also co-facilitating this with another person to give the workshop a different level of energy through the day. The day starts at 9 a.m, it finishes at 4 p.m. It's over 2 days, but on the second day we finish for a long lunch and there's a live band in the background. All during the experience, I can tell that everyone in the workshop is over the moon with enthusiasm. They're charged. They can't wait to bring back the new insights and try different things back in their workplace. At this long lunch on the second day, we have a mystery guest speaker that joins in for an informal panel type conversation. Now, listeners, if I'm truly thinking big and trying to set an example for you, my list, I guess, of 5 guest speakers would be Simon Sinek, Gary Vaynerchuk, David Beckham, Melinda Gates, and probably former Prime Minister of Australia, John Howard. So what would your ultimate workshop look like? If you've got any ideas, please send me an email and let me know at hello@leannehughes.com, or just DM me on LinkedIn, or share your ideas on the Flipchart community on Facebook. Okay, in terms of facilitation, a few things I've learned this year, particularly from working in other countries. The first one is to just chill out a bit, Leanne, just to relax a lot more. So for example, in India, the workshop started at 9 a.m, but that is when breakfast arrived and people were continuing to arrive. And I remember looking around the room around 9:10 in the morning, and the only person looking nervous about starting was me. Everyone else was really happy just to connect and talk to each other and were very relaxed. I've always been a real stickler for time. I value things like punctuality. So I had to learn to relax and remember that I was leading this workshop and I could control things to get us out on time, but I just needed to chill out. And that's been really nice, actually, because I think that comes into a sense of control. And what I've learned from a lot of guests on this show is that it's important to relinquish control and be flexible. So yeah, it's not easy for me to do because I kind of get this feeling like, oh, you've got to start on time. But like I said, I've had to put that away. So that was a really great lesson from other cultures. Also, putting a time frame and a cool down routine for myself. I talk about cool down routines in my 12 rules for facilitation in the way that you should end a workshop, but as well as cooling down at the end of a day, particularly when you run like a highly charged workshop, you're overseas or traveling on the road, so you're not back at home in your usual environment. I often will hop on the computer and I will edit things that we're running the next day to make it better for the participants. But I've actually got to put a time frame on that and go, look, I've spent 30 minutes on iterating and then I need to like get to bed or read or do what it takes to just cool myself down. So when I get to sleep or when I go to try to sleep, I'm not thinking about the day. So journaling has been really helpful. I've learned how effective flip charts can be over PowerPoint. So vote one flip charts. Even the process of preparing your flip charts before the workshop is really quite therapeutic and nice because that's when you go through in your mind, how will I explain this? What's the flow like? What are the key visuals here? It's a really nice prompt for you. And I've also learned that it's important to have a consolidated, robust list of about 10 of your favorite icebreakers or activities that require no resources to use, that you can just bring in when you need a bit more of a spark or energy in your workshop room. Or if you finish before time and your client expects you to finish at a certain time, you can use these activities to pan that out a bit. And it's not a waste of time, it's quite useful for the participants. That question I asked earlier is, what is the topic you're most drawn to? And I think this is a very useful question if you're thinking about what you want to specialize in, whether you're in a company or you're a solopreneur, consultant running your own thing. It's a constant question I'm asking myself when I think about what are the topics I really want to drill down on and be an expert on. So a nice way to figure that out is to think and reflect on those workshops you've delivered and the topics that you've been most energized by. For example, I've been very lucky that many of my workshops this year have been quite generalist in nature, like 3-day leadership programs. And the topics that really drive me or the questions that I love getting asked are, how do I influence across other departments when I don't have direct authority, motivating my teams, and productivity. I think those 3 things I love. So just paying more attention to that. Okay, now we're moving on to the second category, which is business and careers. And I'll give you some more questions to explore here. Think about your career highlights from the year. Like what I do when I do this with groups, when I talk about career highlights, is I play a video of Roger Federer entering centre court, which is Rod Laver Arena at the Australian Open, and he's warming up against his opponent, and the court announcer starts listing off all of Roger Federer's achievements. Like he's won the Australian Open, Wimbledon. And it's hilarious because Roger Federer's list of accomplishments